Meagan sat in her old car, clutching the lifeless body of her cat. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by her labored breathing, filling the car with sounds of worry and pain. Time seemed frozen, and even the light from the street lamps, filtering through the worn glass, couldn't warm her. She gazed at the small body that had once been a lively, fluffy creature with trusting eyes. Now, it was just a cold, silent burden in her hands. Memories of John, her ex-boyfriend, flashed through Meagan's mind. She couldn't recall how it all began, but one thing was clear: Morris was his pet, and now John had heartlessly abandoned him on the street. This marked the end of their shared life, a breakup she couldn't fully overcome. Yet, despite everything, she couldn't abandon this sick, exhausted creature who had been part of her past. How could this happen? Why did John do this? These questions haunted her, part of a larger, unsolved puzzle. But none of it mattered as she looked at the cat. Meagan held him a little tighter, feeling her heart ache. Deep down, she still felt a bond with this creature who, like her, had endured loss. The problem was that, despite his loneliness from the past, the cat had become the only link to a time she tried to forget. But she couldn't. Sitting in the car amid the night's emptiness, Meagan realized there was no force that could take away her last chance to help the one being that might have truly loved her. She sighed and started the engine, driving to the clinic. When Meagan entered the clinic, the air was filled with the scent of disinfectant and old medicines. As she approached the vet, her heart pounded with fear and anxiety. The vet was silent, his expression concerned, his words heavy. "The cat has a serious illness," the vet said after examining Morris. His gaze was clear and cold. "The treatment is expensive, and the chances of full recovery are slim. However, surgery could at least ease his suffering." Meagan felt her chest tighten. She looked around at the empty clinic walls, searching for support but finding none. The sterile, lifeless environment mirrored the emptiness in her soul. Her hand trembled as she pulled out her wallet, taking out all the money she had left. A few thousand more, saved over time. It was enough for the cat's treatment, but as she realized this might be her last chance to escape debt and forget the past, her heart sank. She faced a tough decision: spend her last savings on the surgery or let the cat die to start a new life, free from the past. Meagan felt torn, as if two heavy burdens weighed on her shoulders, the cat and her own past. "You need to make a decision," the vet said, but everything around her darkened. She couldn't believe she was facing this choice again. The cat reminded her of John, of all they had shared, the good and the bad. This cat was a piece of her memory, a symbol of a love now lost. But she couldn't help wondering, if she let him die alone, what would that say about her? About her ability to care and forgive? Her gaze lingered on the cat. He lay still in her hands, his small body weak. She felt his pain as her own. Meagan sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly, feeling her fingers nervously tap the cold metal. Her eyes were fixed on the cat lying on the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket. He was weak, his breathing barely audible, but there was still hope. At times, she felt as if she saw through his eyes, as if this cat was her last connection to the years she had left behind. With each mile she drove, her heart ached with memories of John. He was more than just an ex. He was part of her life, part of a world once filled with love and promises. But all that had crumbled, slipping through her fingers like sand. He had abandoned the cat on the street, a helpless creature, and Meagan couldn't, and wouldn't, leave him. When she entered the clinic, the air was filled with the scent of sterility and medicines. The vet silently examined the animal, then looked up and said, "The chances of recovery are minimal, and the surgery will be expensive. We can try, but there's no guarantee." Meagan felt something inside her break. She had to make a choice, but both paths seemed daunting. Leave the cat to die or pay her last savings for the surgery, risking being left with nothing? But her gaze fell on the cat, and she knew she couldn't abandon him. The vet offered to do everything possible but warned that if the money ran out, the treatment would have to stop. Meagan nodded, gritting her teeth. The decision was made. As she left the doctor, she walked down the corridor, pondering how to raise the funds. All her savings were long gone, and in that moment, she did something unexpected. She sold her old coin collection, a treasured heirloom from her father. It was the last valuable item she owned, but Meagan didn't hesitate. She knew that everything she did now was for the cat, to try to regain a piece of the person she used to be, someone capable of love and care. Standing in line at the clinic, her phone buzzed in her bag. Meagan pulled it out, and John's name flashed on the screen. She sighed, gritting her teeth, and opened the message. He wanted the cat back, promising some compensation. His words felt distant and hollow, like the emptiness in his voice when they parted. Meagan stared at the screen for a long time, her eyes filled not with anger or resentment, but with weariness. "I don't want this," she whispered to herself. Without a second thought, she closed the message and put the phone back in her bag. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her. She was ready to let go of everything connected to him. The decision about the cat wasn't just a choice. It was a moment of realization that she needed to give not only the animal but also herself a chance. It was her opportunity to start a new path. Meagan looked back at the clinic, feeling a sense of liberation. She had made her choice, and it was her way to healing. The cat was her last link to the past, and now she had to let him go to leave behind everything that hadn't brought her happiness. Meagan sat in the small room of the veterinary clinic, her eyes fixed on Morris. He lay on the operating table, connected to tubes and wires, barely conscious from the anesthesia. The vet stood nearby, explaining the possible risks of the surgery. Meagan tried to listen, but her thoughts drifted to painful, almost unbearable memories. The chances were slim, the odds of full recovery almost non-existent. That much was clear. But Meagan couldn't leave him, couldn't abandon him in this moment. She understood that the surgery wasn't a guarantee he would survive or that his life would continue as before. But she could at least try to ease his suffering, to do something that didn't depend on fate. "We'll do everything we can," the vet said, looking at her with that professional yet compassionate smile reserved for such situations. Meagan nodded, clenching her fists. She couldn't let his life end here, in this cold, sterile place. Her heart was broken, and she didn't know where to direct her pain. But now, looking at Morris lying with his eyes closed, his frail body marked by despair, she understood one thing. He was the only living being that still connected her to a time when everything seemed possible. His loyalty, his silent presence, all of it pulled her back to the past. To John. To moments when the cat was their shared joy. When he brought happiness even in the years when love seemed so natural. She looked at Morris, his short fur seeming faded, his eyes slightly closed. He had always been so beautiful. So calm. Too calm, as if he knew what awaited him and wasn't ready to fight. Everything inside her tightened, as if she herself was fighting for her own survival. For her soul. The vet left, leaving her alone with this agonizing choice. Meagan leaned over and gently stroked Morris's head, her hand trembling. She squeezed his paw, trying to find the strength not to fall. Meagan walked through the clinic, trying not to think about the pain tearing at her soul. She felt the tension inside her growing with each second. The noise of cars, conversations, the footsteps of nurses, it all blended into an endless stream, but it couldn't drown out the voice in her head. What if he didn't survive the surgery? How could she live with that? How could she go on if everything vanished into nothingness? The door creaked open. She turned to see the vet who had taken Morris for surgery. He said the procedure would begin in a few minutes, and she could wait in the hallway. Meagan walked down the corridor again, pausing uncertainly by the windows, gazing at the green flower beds and the gleam of the morning sun. Memories of John flooded her mind, like scenes from a strange, surreal painting. They had been young, happy, as if the world was theirs for the taking. The cat had been part of that picture, the only living symbol of their love. But now she was alone, and she couldn't understand what she wanted. To cope with this, to help the cat, or to somehow restore what had been lost. Memories of John returned, always haunting her. His face, his voice. She felt his presence even here, in this sterile, unfamiliar clinic. It was all so painfully familiar, as if she were trying to bridge the gap between those moments when their lives seemed intertwined and full of meaning. As she pondered, Meagan realized, perhaps she wasn't just trying to save Morris. Perhaps she was trying to regain what had been lost, to regain love, to regain those moments when her heart could still feel happiness and belonging. But was that true? She wasn't sure. Her life was now filled with emptiness, with these last chances to restore what had been lost. In that moment, when the doctors approached her with grim faces, something inside Meagan crumbled. She didn't hear a word they said. Only a snapshot, like a memory from the past, of her and John laughing, and the cat, still a kitten, playfully hiding under a chair. All of that was now in the past, just like her. "We did everything we could," the vet said, but his words didn't reach her. Her lips didn't move, the words didn't register. Meagan stood as if in a fog. Her fingers clutched something in her hands. The cat's body. The pain of loss was physical. She felt her own heart slowing, her breath becoming more labored. She couldn't believe this had happened. Everything she had done, all these past months, had been for nothing. She hadn't saved him. She hadn't saved him from what they both couldn't escape. Time seemed frozen. The clinic walls felt alien, like unfamiliar places. Meagan couldn't understand how her life could continue if this cat, the last remnant of her past, was gone. Her mind was empty, as if she had lost her last connection to the world she once knew. Tears slowly filled her eyes, but she couldn't cry. Instead, a heaviness settled in her body. The cat's body grew cold in her hands. Meagan held him tighter, as if trying to transfer her pain and confusion into him. How do I go on? She wondered, the question tearing her apart. And though the answer seemed obvious, she had to let him go, let go of everything that held her. She couldn't grasp how. How could she let go of this connection, this piece of the past that had become so precious to her? She felt another realization growing inside her. This wasn't just a loss, it was a liberation. Perhaps the cat had to go. He was the last link to those days when everything was different. And now, with him gone, she could begin to let go. Her life could be different. All that remained was to make the decision, to forgive, and to move forward. Her eyes closed as she whispered to herself, "You were a part of me, Morris. You were part of that world. But I'm ready to move on." Meagan didn't know what lay ahead. But deep down, she understood. Perhaps to learn to forgive, one must first realize that forgiveness is not just for others, but for oneself. Meagan sat in silence, surrounded only by the faint light from the window, which fell on her hands holding the warm, now lifeless body of the cat. He was quiet, as if not breathing. In his short life, which couldn't continue, there was more meaning than one could imagine. All that remained now were memories, in their light and shadow. It felt strange to hold him, strange to feel his coldness. But in that coldness, there was a sense of peace. In his silence, in his departure, her soul was torn. Her body felt the emptiness of a long battle with no winners. And yet, something within her understood that the cat's death wasn't just a physical loss. It was a liberation. It was like the closing of a chapter left unfinished. Morris, the last witness to her life, was gone. And with his departure, all those unresolved questions, all those unclosed doors seemed to vanish. Meagan never could have imagined her life unfolding this way. She didn't know how to move forward, but in that moment, sitting with the cat in her hands, she felt a sense of finally letting go. Everything, forgiveness, and the pain that wouldn't let her live. All of it began to dissolve, and within her, there was silence. A silence she hadn't felt in a long time. With each breath, the emptiness became lighter. With each moment, it became clearer that her life now belonged to her. Letting go of this world, of everything she once knew, wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Because only after forgiving could she truly let go. Meagan felt ready to move forward. And perhaps this path wouldn't be easy. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt it was possible. Meagan approached her apartment, the key in her hand feeling heavy, as if the weight of her entire past hung on it. She opened the door, and the cold air, filled with the scent of dust and old memories, hit her. Everything was the same, every corner, every item, but now, without the cat, this place felt foreign. Silent. Every noise from her life seemed to echo in the corners, and now, each shadow reminded her of lost time. She walked through the rooms, struggling to look away from the photos on the walls, where she and John had once been happy. Those captured moments no longer brought joy, only pain. The pain of what she couldn't hold on to. The pain of what was lost. Her chest felt empty and heavy. She knew she wouldn't find peace here. This place had become a cage. Setting her bag down, Meagan paused. She stood in the center of the room, as if weighing her decision. She felt the burden slowly lifting from her. She brought her hand to her heart, and the strange silence that filled her soul became soft and warm. The silence wasn't loneliness. It was liberation. "It's time to say goodbye," she whispered to herself and took the first step toward the new. She knew she would soon leave this home. Sell the apartment. Everything would be different. Dreams of a new beginning, despite everything she had been through, seemed real. In this place, within these walls, she could no longer be herself. She felt the world opening new horizons before her. Within her, a strength she hadn't felt in a long time was awakening. Meagan understood. She wasn't just leaving. She was setting herself free. This was the beginning of her new path. A few days later, Meagan stood at the doors of an animal shelter. Her heart pounded, but she didn't feel the fear she once had. This was a decision that gave her hope. Here, among the small animals that no one loved, she could find her purpose. This time, it didn't matter what happened to her past. She was ready to give love to those who needed it most. Meeting the restrained gazes of the dogs and cats, Meagan felt a connection to something important. As if every look, every purr and bark were her personal saviors. Not knowing how many days and nights she would spend here, Meagan already knew she was ready to open her heart to someone else. Her hands, once exhausted, finally found a task. She would care for those who suffered, and this would give her the strength to move forward. Even if her heart still felt the emptiness of loss, she was ready to fill it with a new purpose. She decided to help animals, and in return, they could teach her true love and forgiveness. With each day, as she fed them, played with them, and cleaned their cages, Meagan's inner world became more harmonious. She understood that her life wasn't over. It was just beginning. Meagan walked along the path that led to a small hill on the outskirts of the city, where Morris was buried. That same cat who once sat on her lap in moments of loneliness, looking at her with his deep, eternally sad eyes. He had been the last link to her past, to what once felt like home, to those moments that now seemed foreign. And now, after all this time, she found herself here again, at his grave. But this time, her soul held no pain, only peace. The inner peace she had sought since the day she decided it was time to let go. In her hands, Meagan held a small stone, smooth and bright, like a symbol of something new. She stopped at the grave, looking at it with a sense of tranquility that had often filled her in recent weeks. On the horizon, the sunset blazed with vibrant hues, as if bidding farewell to the day that had passed, to what would never return. She knelt down and gently placed the stone on the ground. This was her way of forgiving herself, forgiving John, forgiving Morris for what she couldn't do more. All those days filled with fear, regret, and pain were now fading with this small gesture. Forgiveness isn't just words, it's what you leave behind when you realize you can no longer hold on. "Forgive me, Morris," she whispered softly, smiling, but it wasn't a bitter smile. She felt something changing within her. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it brings liberation. And perhaps this was the moment when she forgave not only the cat but also herself for all her own weaknesses and mistakes. She had made many sacrifices, but now she understood that her life didn't belong to John or even to the cat. She was free from resentment, from attachments, from everything that held her in the past. And most importantly, she had forgiven John for all he had done to her, forgiven Morris for leaving. Because it was through his departure that she found her path. She closed her eyes and once again felt John's presence, remembering how he brought Morris into their home, how they cared for him together. But that was long ago. Now, on this hill, Meagan understood that her life didn't belong to him. She was free from resentment, from attachments, from everything that held her in the past. And most importantly, she had forgiven John for all he had done to her, forgiven Morris for leaving. Because it was through his departure that she found her path. Through tears that suddenly welled up in her eyes, Meagan stood up, feeling her feet steadier beneath her. She felt a warmth in her chest and a slight, barely perceptible smile on her lips. This stone, her small symbol of a new beginning, was an important step. It was the sign that she was ready to move forward, ready to start a new path that would lead her to herself. She looked back at the hill and, before leaving, whispered, "Goodbye, Morris. Thank you." But her voice was not heavy, it was filled with gratitude. That cat had been part of her journey, and now he was part of her story. A story she had accepted, letting go of all that was heavy within it. Meagan stood at the edge of the hill, gazing at the horizons that blazed with fiery hues. Her heart held no fear or regret. She felt that something new and important lay ahead. Though she had experienced loss, the pain she had carried was no longer unbearable. She clutched the small stone in her hands, as if it were her talisman, her amulet that gave her strength. She had freed herself from the past, and now her life belonged to her. Meagan realized that Morris's loss, though painful, had been her catharsis. She had let go and allowed herself forgiveness. This was her first step toward a new life, a life full of possibilities and inner freedom. A life she could build herself. She could build it, knowing that her heart was now open to the new. She turned and stepped toward the city, feeling a lightness in her soul with each step. A new beginning was within reach.